Hello, I'm going to present to you a lake management framework for global application, monitoring, restoring, and protecting lakes through community engagement. This framework is the product of a discussion that began at the Gleon 21 all-hands meeting at the Deerhurst Resort in Huntsville, Ontario, Canada. Gleon is the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network, and for those who have never attended one of their meetings, the meeting style is designed to encourage collaboration in solving pressing limnological questions. Its attendees hail from around the globe, bringing a diverse perspective to the meeting. Participants pitch ideas out to the audience, and then those interested in particular ideas spend a good portion of the meeting fleshing those ideas out together in person. After the meeting, those interested keep meeting virtually, picking up and losing participants along the way. So our group has met regularly for a couple of years, hashing out this framework. In February of this year, we published in Lake and Reservoir Management. Because it was nominated for the NOMS La Bounty Award, it will be available for free download by non-members for 3 months. This is the basic idea that was pitched at the Gleon meeting in 2019. As limnologists, we often find ourselves disappointed with the trajectory lake health are taking. There are times when, as scientists, the solutions to existing or persistent lake health issues seems clear to us, but we feel as helpless bystanders bearing witness to lake management failures. Maybe if we could better define what is needed for successful lake management, so all players and steps needed are clearly defined, that might help move more lakes management efforts to achieve what we as limnologists define as successful. A number of people have contributed to this effort since 2019. This is the list of the final authors. In 2019, the group coalesced around a framework developed by employees at the Ministry of the Environment and Energy in Ontario, which was in 1995. These government scientists developed a framework in response to comments made by a newly appointed Minister of the Environment, who sincerely wondered just why the Ministry of the Environment had so much emphasis on science and needed scientists. The government scientists hashed out a framework they thought demonstrated where science fit into the picture of successful environmental structure. Ultimately, the paper was not published, but decades later, Norm Yan still had a copy of it, and he happened to be at the Gleon meeting to share it with the group. Since that meeting, the group built upon the main tenets of the framework, its flexibility to accommodate all stressors, and the continuous nature of environmental management. It also kept the idea that one could enter the framework at any point in time and from any place in the framework. It emphasizes that lake management needs monitoring and stakeholder involvement if lake restoration and protection are to be successful. The group has crafted this framework to be specific to lakes, and it draws upon the literature relevant to each step to help better define them for everyone at the lake management table. This is the resultant framework. Ultimately, the goal of this framework is to provide a tool or a roadmap of sorts for those participating in lake management to better understand the importance of the role they and others play in the ultimate outcome for the lake ecosystem. So let's walk through our framework. The first thing we want you to notice is the 3 main parts of the framework. There is the monitoring ecosystem state loop, which starts with defining the reference condition M1. Then there is the selection and refinement of detection and compliance indicators in M2. Then the target conditions are set in M3. Then there is the collection of the data and monitoring of the detection and compliance indicators in M4. And finally, an assessment of the state of the ecosystem is made in M5. Effective communication of the state of the lake ecosystem is a crucial step in the framework and requires accurate conveyance of the science while making it accessible and understandable to non-scientists in the public and policy-making arenas. There is the restoring or protecting ecosystem loop, which identifies the stressors using diagnostic indicators. Then a thorough understanding of the factors causing the undesirable ecosystem state is necessary to develop a successful management plan. research into the identity and mode of action of the stressor causing the lake's condition, and a list of potential sources of the stressor are required. This is what we term model stressor action in step RP2. In RP3, there is an assessment or development of remedial or regulatory options. RP3 requires engagement with participants from many different sectors, both to develop the list of potential options and to evaluate the magnitude of impact and probability of restoration success. Once one or more preferred options for restoration are assessed or developed, they need to be implemented. That's RP4, where we implement the preferred option. Regular ongoing monitoring of lake response to the implemented actions is necessary to ensure that the restoration or prevention target is attained and ultimately that values laid out in the community access are achieved. The results obtained here should be summarized into a new state of the ecosystem report, which can be compared against the desired state. If the restoration actions were successful, management can return to the monitoring ecosystem state loop. If the actions were unsuccessful or only partially successful, management will return to RP1 to evaluate additional restoration and protection options. Here's the community access. This is the central axis of the MoReCo framework, which identifies the importance of community engagement for successful natural resource management and outlines the different levels of interaction. Our framework proposes 4 steps to operationalize the engagement in the community access. To start, community members must be identified. Then, appropriate channels, pathways, and engagement mechanisms should be selected in C2. Through these engagement mechanisms, managers will seek community input and then prioritize goals if multiple or conflicting issues or concerns arise in C3. Once the goals and priorities for the lake are clear, these can be combined with knowledge of ecosystem state to evaluate whether current ecosystem conditions align with the prioritized goals in C4. The result of the evaluation directs the process toward either the monitoring loop or the restoring protecting loop. After these loops, the framework can be used iteratively by reinitiating the community access stages and the subsequent loops again. Here is one example of how the authors envision the framework being used. This is the story of a shallow pond in Vermont, a pond that, as a limnologist, I'd say we have failed in our management of it. Not because the water quality is poor or trending in the wrong direction. In fact, our monitoring data going back to 1980 showed the phosphorus and chlorophyll A levels to be relatively stable. But because there is a strong local unhappiness with the current navigability, abundant plant growth, and perception that the pond is filling in. But for our purposes here, let's call it a fictitious lake name, Lake Wobegon. Using the MoReCo lake management framework, we can focus in on each step and rank whether we think it has been met in blue, it's there but needs help in yellow, or it's missing or is very weak in red. If we don't know if the step has been met, we'll color it gray. Looking at this framework, we see that the biggest weakness is in the community access and ultimately in the social science aspect of this lake management challenge. Each time a new department commissioner and agency secretary is appointed by the governor, the complaints reemerge and enormous amounts of limited staff time and resources are invested in this pond. Now, this next example is also from a lake, or actually a reservoir in Vermont. It's what I would call a lake management success story, one that went all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court and was upheld there. But let's use another fictitious name here, and this time let's go with the Chilliwackee Reservoir from Scott Carson's novel The Chill. Using the MoReCo framework, we can focus in on each step and rank whether we think it has been met. In this case, we see that almost all of the steps were met and 3 steps only being partially met. But overall, it was a success. Using this approach, one can more easily discern the areas that need work in any particular lake management scenario. With such an analysis, the active players in the effort can work together to fill the gaps. Some of the potential challenges of the MoReCo framework are that engagement can be time-consuming, expensive, and difficult to operationalize, potentially generating new sources of conflict that create delays in action or result in dissatisfaction among participants. One potential source of frustration is consultation fatigue, which occurs when community members feel that their involvement is not yielding desired outcomes and become tired of the ongoing requests to engage in participatory process. In addition, participants may face barriers to engagement, including lack of time, awareness, interest, and funding, while sustained participation may wax and wane over the time based on the perceived urgency of the issue. Participatory forums and engagement mechanisms can subvert existing decision-making processes, especially when some participants have veto power and may overrule decisions that have been made through participatory mechanisms. Funding can also be a challenge, as our framework does not contain a formal step for resource acquisition. Funding and support are necessary for lake management and must be considered, despite not being explicitly addressed in the MoReCo framework. We see 5 important strengths that make the MoReCo framework useful for almost any type of lake management. First, the framework is designed specifically for lentic systems and the unique management challenges associated with them. Second, community engagement is a major tenet of the MoReCo framework. Community goals and values are identified early and informed by the best available scientific knowledge. The emphasis placed on community input is consistent with the global trend of considering nature's values from numerous and diverse perspectives, and these values are then considered throughout each subsequent step. A third strength is the focus on setting explicit benchmarks for guiding management actions and defining success. A fourth strength of the MoReCo framework is its ability to manage multiple stressors simultaneously. The MoReCo framework includes several elements that can lead to more effective management of multiple stressors. For example, the focus on community engagement means all concerns about water quality can be identified during the application of the framework. Finally, the MoReCo framework recognizes that lake management is a continuous process and must occur without an identified even without an identified stressor. As such, the framework is not unidirectional, unlike other management plans that emphasize sequential steps. Instead, concurrent loops mean that managers can begin at any step, which provides mechanisms to constantly reevaluate priority values, identify stressors early, and address them before they become unmanageable. In some instances, it may be appropriate for managers to move back and forth between steps. The iterative nature incorporates some elements of adaptive management. Its holistic approach and flexibility set the MoReCo framework apart and make it suitable for addressing both current stressors and emerging threats, such as those brought on by climate change, that have not yet been identified. We envision the MoReCo framework as a tool for those involved in lake management and intend for it to be relevant for all lakes across the globe, regardless of characteristic or condition. An important next step will be to evaluate the MoReCo framework's implementation to real-world lake management examples. This is true for upcoming projects as the framework begins to be used, but future work should also focus on how application of the MoReCo framework could have benefited past lake management case studies. The co-authors plan to begin undertaking a follow-up paper to plug case studies into the framework to see what steps are consistently strong in lake management success stories and what steps are often weakest in lake management failures. I'd like to end by thanking Leon and my many co-authors on this project. It was a truly fun collaborative effort, and I really enjoyed getting to work with such a diverse group of limnologists. Thank you all for your time and interest in our framework.